Hello, my name is Jonathan, and today I'm going to be talking to you about some frequently asked questions about the IELTS listening and speaking exam. Okay, so our first question is, what are the most important things for developing good listening and speaking skills? Is it memorizing a lot of vocabulary or reading more? And the answer to this question is actually very simple, which is reading more. One of the problems with trying to memorize lots of vocabulary is it doesn't work. Unfortunately, when we memorize vocabulary, it goes into our short-term memory, and in a short time, you forget it. I'm sure you had this experience when you were studying English at school. You have an exam, you study really hard for it, maybe you do really well in the exam, and then 2 days later you've forgotten everything. So the next exam you have to do the same thing, and you keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it. All the research shows that the best way to build your vocabulary, the best way to get better at grammar is not by studying vocabulary and grammar, but just reading, and preferably reading for pleasure. So it doesn't matter what you read. It's if you like magazines, read magazines. If you like comics, read comics. If you like novels, of course, you can read novels. Newspapers, okay. I even know students who have improved their English by playing English video games. Basically, the important thing is not so much what you read, but the fact that you actually read a lot. Okay, so the second question is, my English isn't good, especially my speaking and listening. What should I be aware of before taking the IELTS test? Well, I guess the simple answer to this is that IELTS is not a test of your vocabulary and grammar. It's actually a test of your communication skills. English is not really a subject to be studied. It's a tool for communicating with people all over the world. And so the IELTS exam is actually designed in order to test that. So what I mean by that is it's actually testing whether you can speak to other people, whether you can understand other people speaking to you. It's whether you can read maybe text or email sent to you, and you can also answer those things. So the real key to this is improving your English by actually really using English. Question 3. And this says, what type of questions are in the IELTS speaking and listening tests, and how many questions are there? Oh, that's a big question. Okay, so let me start with the speaking exam first. So there are actually 3 sections in this. In section 1, they're going to be asking you questions about yourself. So you know all the answers to this. So maybe they ask you about your home. Maybe they ask you about your school. Maybe they ask you about work or your favorite kind of music, all of these kind of things. In section 2, the exam changes direction a little bit, and they will give you a card, and there'll be a question on it, and you'll get a minute to prepare, and then you have to speak for 1 to 2 minutes. So it's kind of like giving a mini presentation. So really this is about storytelling. It can be a little bit difficult, but I think it's the most exciting part of the exam. And then in section 3, the exam again changes direction. This time you'll get the kind of questions that you might find in a classroom. So these are more abstract, more general questions. And it will be related to the topic in part 2. As for the listening exam, here there are 4 sections, and it starts off relatively easy and then becomes much more difficult. So in section 1, you'll be listening to a conversation between 2 people who want to exchange information. Moving on to section 2, you will listen to a talk, maybe the kind of thing you find on the radio. Maybe somebody's introducing a festival that is going to happen in the town. Or maybe it's a tour group looking at a church or something like this, and somebody will give you a speech. In section 3, you'll again have a conversation, but this is a conversation that takes place in the classroom. So it might be a conversation about two students talking about an assignment. Maybe it's a conversation between a student and his or her tutor or professor. Sometimes you might even have two students and a tutor. And then in the final section, you will listen to either part of a lecture or part of a presentation. So again, this is academic in content. Altogether, there will be 40 questions on the listening exam. Is there a systematic way of learning English and speaking? That's a very interesting question. Is there a systematic way? I think really the answer to this question is to do with your style of learning. For some people, it's very important that they are very organized. In that case, you need to look at each section and work on techniques to improve that. Having said that, personally, I prefer a more organic approach. What I mean by that is you shouldn't just be studying for IELTS. You should sometimes study, but also sometimes you should be just improving your English. And one of the best ways to do that is by listening for pleasure and reading for pleasure. Also taking opportunities to communicate with people as much as possible. So actually use English and use it as a way to communicate rather than just focus on the exam. Question 5 says, I watch a lot of films and shows, but my listening and speaking improve very slowly. A lot of people recommend this, so why isn't it working for me? Probably the number one reason is because when you're watching these shows, you're reading the Chinese subtitles. If you're focusing on the Chinese subtitles, you're basically improving your Chinese reading and not improving your English listening. So one of the keys to this is get rid of the Chinese subtitles. It's okay to use English subtitles if you want. That's not necessarily a bad idea, and sometimes it might be an excellent idea. If you are scared of doing this, one thing you can do, for instance, is maybe you watch a film and you watch it several times. The first time you watch it with Chinese subtitles, and then you watch it a second time with English subtitles, and then you watch it a third time with no subtitles. You're basically learning to not be afraid of not understanding every single word. An example of that is when Lee Ann's Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon first came out. I actually went to the cinema here and watched it, and at that time there were no English subtitles, so I had to use my Chinese, and if you've watched the film you'll know some of the Chinese is kind of old-fashioned. That's not what I studied. So I didn't understand everything. I probably understood about 60-70%, but I actually had a really good time. That's the really key thing. As long as you can follow what's going on, you will definitely improve. Question 6 says, what would happen during the IELTS speaking test? Well, the first thing that happens is they will show you into the room, and the examiner will ask for your name and they will ask for your passport. What they want to do is make sure that it is you taking the test. So in the past, some very naughty people paid somebody else to take the test for them. So they don't let that happen now. So they will check your Chinese name, they'll check your passport, they'll check the photo to make sure this is really you. After that, then they move on to the first part of the exam, so part 1. In this, you will get 2 topics. So maybe they ask about your family, and then they ask about music. And for each of these topics, you'll get 4 or 5 questions. And this will last about 4 or 5 minutes. Then we move on to the second part, which is where you're asked to give a speech. You will be given a task card with a question on it. They will also give you some paper and a pencil, and you can take notes, and you definitely should do that. At the end of the minute, the examiner will ask you to speak, and you need to speak for 1 to 2 minutes. If you haven't finished speaking, they will ask you a simple question to say, politely tell you to shut up. This should take about 3 or 4 minutes. And then in the final parts, you will again get 2 topics, but these topics are related to the topic in part 2, but these are more academic questions. So for instance, if you've been asked to describe a journey you took, maybe the topics are about tourism, or maybe it's about forms of transport. And again, you'll probably get maybe 3 or 4 questions for each topic, but this is more of a discussion with you and the examiner, and that should take about 4 or 5 minutes. So altogether, the speaking test will be somewhere between 12 and 14 minutes in length. What advantages do you think taking an IELTS test would give you? I think there are short-term and long-term advantages to taking IELTS. The first, the short-term advantage is to do with why you're actually taking this test. I guess the main reasons are because people want to study abroad. Maybe they want to work abroad, or sometimes even people want to emigrate and live abroad. And for each of these, you will be asked to prove your English ability, and for some countries, IELTS is the only acceptable form of that. So the first advantage is if you want to work, study or live abroad, by taking this test and proving that your English is good enough, you get that opportunity. And another major advantage of taking IELTS, though, is by having an exam that you need to pass, it means that you will become more focused on English learning. For many people, when they study English, it's just a subject that you study at school or at university, and maybe you study once a week. Because you're not spending a lot of time and you're not spending much time practicing, improvement is very slow. But in order to achieve success in this exam, you're going to need to spend much more time. It's going to be much more intense. So you're likely to improve much more quickly. Long term, I guess the advantage is it helps to build your confidence in English, and hopefully you will acquire a lifelong love of actually using English to communicate with other people, which ultimately is why we learn languages. What do you think is the foundation of English speaking? I'm going to give you 2 answers to this. The first one is basically the foundation of speaking is communication. The whole reason why we learn languages is so that we can actually communicate with other people. I actually have some personal experience of this. When I was at school, we studied French, and I learned almost nothing. With my school, I had an opportunity to go and play basketball with our twin town in France, and I stayed with a French family for a week, and they were really, really nice people, and they spoke no English and I spoke no French. So I spent the whole week smiling at them and lots of body language, and that was kind of like a real revelation to me. I suddenly realized why I'd been wasting my time in a classroom for the previous 2 years. Suddenly French was no longer just a subject at school, but actually something that was really useful. The second part to this question is, what is the foundation of English speaking? I guess the answer is basic grammar. One of the problems we have at school is you study lots and lots and lots and lots of grammar, and the more you study it, the less you know, and the more confused you become. And it's actually not very important. If you do have a grammar book, you might want to consider burning it, because it's not actually that useful. But you do need to learn the basic grammar. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, present tense, I get up, I brush my teeth, I have a coffee. And the reason for that is language is basically patterns. One of the secrets to being a successful second language speaker is not translating. So when I speak French, I think in French. When I speak Chinese, I think in Chinese. And you're just substituting words into a pattern. So you don't need to, when you're speaking, you don't need to think about the grammar. You don't need to translate from one language into another, and it becomes automatic. And by doing that, you find that you improve much, much, much quicker. Question 9 says, is the IELTS listening and speaking test difficult? What are some ways I can prepare for it? Yes and no. Yes, it is. If your English is not very good, then you're not going to be very successful. The general rule is, in terms of improving your IELTS score, you can probably improve about 0.5 in 6 months. So for instance, if you take the IELTS test and you get IELTS 4, with 1 year's study, you should be able to get IELTS 5. So basically, if you're getting IELTS 4 and you need IELTS 7, it's going to take quite a while to actually achieve that. However, if your English is good, but your test-taking ability is poor. So for example, maybe your ability is 7, but you get IELTS 4 in the exam because you really don't know how to take a test. Well, you just need to learn what it is that the examiners want, and you can improve very quickly. So in that sense, no, it's not that difficult. It kind of depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking to emigrate, say you want to go and live in Canada, and they said, yes, we like you, but you need to prove your English ability, they're probably going to ask for like IELTS 4.5, 5, which is not too difficult. If you're looking to maybe do a pre-university course, for instance in the UK, maybe they ask for 5.5. If you're studying for a degree course, probably IELTS 6, master's course, maybe 6.57, that's getting quite difficult now. And then if you're wanting to be maybe a doctor, they'll probably ask for IELTS 8, and yeah, that's pretty difficult. Question 10 says, what are the assessment standards of IELTS speaking and listening? The exam is very objective, I think, in that they spend a lot of time making sure that all the thousands of students taking the exam around the world, whether it's in China, Taiwan, South America, or wherever, they get the same exam and they are to the same standards. Basically, that there are very strict bands about what is 4.5, what is 5, what is 5.5. And for instance, in the speaking exam, when you take the exam, there will be a tape recorder that will record the exam. This is not to test you, this is to test the examiner. So the examiner will give you a score, and then someone else will listen to the recording and make sure that you have been given the correct score. So it's a pretty serious exam. The British accent sounds really polished. Are there any ways that I can learn to talk like Harry Potter? I'll be honest with you, I don't think accent is really that important. You know, if you say banana or glass or gloss, we don't really care. I mean, one of the problems with this, what is a British accent? Actually, in the UK, we probably have about 200 different accents. So, for instance, you've got mine. The King of England speaks like this. It sounds like he has a peach in his mouth. In Lannan, they speak like this, they do. where I come from, in my hometown, they speak like this. So there are kind of lots of different accents. So when you say you want to sound like somebody from Britain, it's actually a really difficult question because people speak in lots of different ways. However, if you really, this is your big desire, I guess there are two things that you can do. The first one is just listen to lots of British speakers and then try to copy them. And I guess that's kind of good because it means that you have to learn to listen more carefully. But the real key is not so much about accent as about what we call intonation. Intonation is about the stress of words. So for example, the word intonation, it's not intonation. What we do is we've got two short sounds, inter, and then we've got a, this is a very long sound, and last shun. So it's kind of intonation. So this is what we mean by intonation. It's about how we stress sound. So, and if you get the stress in the right word, you'll sound like a native speaker. Okay, so question 12 says, what are the most common problems that Taiwanese people have while speaking English? The most common problem is Chinglish. What I mean by that is often when people are speaking English, they actually use English words with Chinese grammar. What they're doing is they're translating from Chinese into English, and unfortunately Chinese grammar and English grammar are different, and that inevitably means that you end up making mistakes, which sometimes makes it very difficult for the English listener to understand what you're saying. The basic reason for this is because you're translating, and people translate because it makes them feel safe, basically. You know, like you're good at Chinese, so like if you think of about what you want to say first in Chinese and then you translate it, you know that you're going to be able to say what you want to say, but unfortunately it doesn't work. So the most important thing is actually thinking in English whilst you're speaking in English. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things you need to do is learn basic grammar patterns so that you can actually just use those patterns and you just substitute words. Now, in the exam, the examiners will be looking for you to use more complex English, but actually complex English is simple sentences combined together. So for example, I say, I have an umbrella. That's a simple sentence. It is raining. That's a simple sentence, but I can put those together. If it is raining, I bring an umbrella. We now have a complex sentence. So it's basically about learning the basic patterns and then learning how to combine the basic patterns. And if you can do that, you can express quite complex ideas without actually having to translate. The second most common problem is people being afraid to speak. And what I mean by that is people are often afraid of making mistakes, and therefore they don't say very much. English speakers actually don't really care when you make a mistake because we're not listening to your grammar. We are concentrating on what you're saying. Most English people's second language are either zero or not very good. So, I mean, and you've probably seen this here, foreigners come to Taiwan and they say, ni hao, and everyone says, oh, their English, the Chinese are so good. Well, you know, people don't judge you when you try to use another language. Well, actually, they're impressed, and all they want to do is understand what you're saying. So never be afraid to actually speak. So every opportunity you get to talk to somebody in English, take that opportunity and don't be afraid of being laughed at, because nobody will laugh at your English. Question 13, are there any recommended shows or podcasts that you think can improve speaking and listening? I'm not going to give you a specific show or podcast, but the simple answer to this is something you find interesting. If you're crazy about cars, you can watch a show about cars. If you're into animals, maybe watch Animal Planet, and so on. The key to this is, we know that reading a lot for pleasure helps you to improve your English. We know that listening a lot for pleasure helps to improve your English. If you're forcing yourself to do these things and it's not interesting to you, you will very soon stop doing it. So the most important thing is to choose something you find English and just stick to it. And it's okay, you don't have to spend a lot of time doing this. One of the secrets is a little but often. Like maybe you want to watch a film. It's okay to watch 10 minutes and then pause it and watch another 10 minutes the next day. You don't have to force yourself to watch for like 3 hours all in one go. Is there anything you'd like to add to help people prepare for the IELTS test? Yeah, the most important thing in terms of preparing for the IELTS test is have fun. And I know that's difficult because it's a serious exam. If you can enjoy English, you can enjoy communicating, you will improve much, much, much quicker than just studying and studying. People sometimes spend too much time studying. It's like really important. I've got to get my IELTS 7 so I can go and study abroad. And they kind of forget that it's not just about study skills, it's actually also about just improving your English. And the best way to improve your English is through communication. And communication is a fun thing to do, so make sure that you're having fun. Okay, so that's all of our questions for today. However, if you do have any other questions, please feel free to come to Yangshaw. There will always be somebody here happy to answer any of your questions. And don't forget, when you're studying English, have fun.